Hello everyone, it's James O'Reilly from Northeast Wealth, and I'm here today to talk to you about something which a lot of our clients go through, and it's the importance of navigating career change, how to find more clarity, have more control, and also be more confident about some of the big changes that might happen in your career or be happening in your career right now. And now, firstly, at a high level, we know there's a lot of reasons why career change can take place. Often there's intentional career change, and that might come in the shape of perhaps pursuing a new opportunity, finding something you think is going to be more exciting or engage you better, leave something that you're not overly satisfied with, or alternatively just seeking to get a better work-life balance, maybe reducing your hours and seeking to take a little bit more control of your own personal life. There's also the unintentional career change, that might come due to a redundancy. That might come because legislative changes mean that the role that you were doing previously is going to be harder and harder to do in the future. Or you might just be looking at things and perceiving that in the future, the current career that you're in is just going to become more and more compressed, and it's going to be harder for you to have the success that you would like to have. Regardless of the reason why you might be considering a career change, there's a lot of really, really important things to think about before you jump into this. Our experience more often than not with clients is that they tend to jump into this with certainly a lack of planning and often no planning in the areas that matter most. So as part of going through this, I'd really love to share as much as I can about some of the things that you really should be thinking about if you're considering a career change, as well as a bit of a blueprint for perhaps what success is going to look like if you are going to be making that change in the future. I'm going to move myself down here. So firstly, at a high level, when we talk about addressing some of the uncertainties that exist with a career change, this is a common list of uncertainties that we observe from people making this decision. Often there's a corresponding drop in wages if you're starting a brand new career or seeking to fully transition. How do you afford that drop in wages? How do you be sure that you're not going to run into any surprises in terms of retraining costs? Perhaps it's going to take longer than you think in order to get back to a wage level that you're anticipating. Be confident that the role will fulfill you. Or alternatively, if you're looking to reduce your hours, be confident that you're actually going to be happy with the end product. Understand the impact to your personal life both ways. If this means more hours, more study, more research, or alternatively, if it means less, how's that going to flow onto your personal life? And the last part of this is your financial situation actually going to improve as a result of this? On the whole, can this be structured in such a way that you're going to get better outcomes going forward? Now, of course, these uncertainties, in reality, these are at face value. This is just a couple of simple examples of the things that can get in the way of making a decision. But underneath these, there are some legitimate fears that exist, which can really halt you from feeling confident about making a decision. There's very often we see this fear, what about if I embark on this journey and cash flow, nothing works the way that I want, and I can't afford anything? What happens if I really let my family down because I'm not able to provide for them in the way that I wanted? What happens if I've just completely miscalculated this and this transpires to be the worst decision in the entire world? What happens if I go through this process and I realize that the whole thing has been a waste of time and a waste of money and a waste of energy? And that's an underlying fear that I think stems across almost all of these uncertainties. Just not being entirely sure that what you are thinking about doing, again, whether it's more hours, less hours, whether it's a completely different change or maybe just a significant role change from what you're doing, in the future, am I going to look back on this and be really proud of the decision that I made? Or am I going to look back on this and say, geez, I wish I hadn't have done that? And the problem with that approach is it's a normal human emotion to encounter that. But then the problem with this approach is that it's a huge driver of decision fatigue. A lot of you will have heard this expression before. This is something that I think that it is incredibly detrimental when it comes to making a career change or any significant change in your lives, really. And that's the idea that this is a psychological bias that humans have. It's a real thing that if you have to make a lot of decisions, and there's, as it says here, a long session of decision making, the quality of your decisions deteriorate over time. And that doesn't mean that 3/4 of the way through when you're exhausted, you say, you know what, I've got to stop here just because I can't make any more decisions. And actually often means the opposite. You say, look, whatever, let's just make any decisions. Let's just do something and move on. And that can be a really, really toxic way to make some of the biggest decisions in your life. So as a flow-on of this, there's a heavy message I have if you're watching this video here, and that's that if you're watching this video because perhaps you're either inspired to have a career change or change a role in a significant way, or alternatively, you've already done that and you're still a little bit unsure as to if you've got it right, the time to act is now. If you're feeling fresh, great. Use that freshness to ensure that you're making the best decisions that you can. But if you're not feeling fresh, I'm sorry to say that you're probably not going to feel better. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to look at this with even better visibility in the future, because that's what decision fatigue is. It continues to be crippling and crippling. So to that end, again, there certainly is hopefully some impetus for you to take some action here, regardless of what that action looks like. There's plenty of people that spend a lot of their lives thinking about doing something or thinking about getting interested in doing something. And the message overarchingly for you should be that if you're motivated enough to be watching this video and this deep into this video, then I dare say there's enough of a focus on this that it would be prudent to take some sort of action in the short term and commit personally to doing that yourselves. If we think about defining success with a career, I often like to use this blueprint with clients when they're just talking about their roles in general, and that there are a few different sides to a successful role or a successful career to ensure that it's genuinely meeting your needs and facilitating life on your terms. The first one we've got here on the right hand side is that idea that it aligns with your personal values and your interests. If you're doing a role that has no alignment whatsoever with what's truly important to you, and there's no tasks within that role that give you any excitement, you're going to find it really, really hard to feel engaged and do purposeful work. Equally, on the other side, we've got integration with your personal life. And note my language there. I haven't said work-life balance. And the reason I haven't is because I don't think work-life balance is necessarily the goal for everyone. In today's day and age in particular, work more and more often is starting to seep into personal lives and then becoming quite transient versus 50 years ago when your average role might be on that conveyor belt style role where you'd arrive at 9, you'd clock on, you'd finish at 5, clock off, and then you'd finish you'd go home. And there'd be just complete separation between what you did that day versus what your life looks like afterward. That's increasingly becoming less and less common, which is why I like the term integration. I think that the goal should be that both elements of your life integrate with one another very well, rather than aiming for a really clean line of delineation all the time, where you can just truly clock on and clock off and just forget about it altogether. And then the last component here is enabling your financial goals. Ultimately, your income is a facilitator to help you to do the things that you want to do. And whether or not this enables your income and therefore your role, the income that you derive from your role, enables your financial goals, is going to ultimately be a reflection of what your goals are and what's meaningful to you and what you want to achieve in the future, not just for you, but for your family, for everyone. So to that end, in my experience, I find that if an individual has all of these three things right, typically speaking, that they will be certainly on the right path toward career success. Now, I'd also point out before we move on here that, of course, you don't necessarily need to be, exactly in the sweet spot here, where you're a 10 out of 10 with alignment and a 10 out of 10 with integration and a 10 out of 10 in terms of your financial progress. Most roles, like in life in general, there'll be compromises. There might be a case that if you're looking at a career change, you might be thinking to myself, well, gee whiz, this career change, if I get it right, is going to significantly enable my financial goals. My income will double. But the downside is it's going to have much less alignment with my values because I'm not going to be as interested doing the work. And it's not necessarily going to integrate very well with my personal life either, because I'm going to be working 80 hours a week. So to that end, if we were to put down a dot between these 3 points here, you might be somewhere about there. Highly enables your financial life, but it doesn't really serve the others. Equally, you might have a role that absolutely aligns with your values and you absolutely love the work, but it just so happens that the pay is really poor, and it doesn't necessarily integrate with your personal life either because it involves a huge amount of time and effort. And if that's the case that you're there again, I'm not going to say that that's a fail because everyone is different here, but it certainly is. I guess it lends a hand to think about how well it's meeting all three of these, and the sweet spot should ideally, be pretty close to the center here, whereby you've got a nice even balance between the three. If you're overweight one way, that's okay, but you have to be very much at peace with the compromises that flow on, being that when you're overweight in one area, you're without a doubt going to be underweight in others. I suggest that we might look to build out on these a little bit more, because I think that if you are looking to undertake a career change or a role change, or again reduce hours, that flow on here is, well, what exactly do each of these elements mean, and how can I feel confident that it's achieving any one of these three, let alone all three? So starting off with integration of your personal life, some of the questions that I believe are really prudent to ask around this topic. Firstly, what will you need to say no to? If you are looking to undertake a career change, there's a very high likelihood that that's going to involve a lot more of your time, especially in the short to medium term. And there almost definitely will be things that you have to sacrifice. And I can use myself as an example. I've been a business owner for coming up 5 years now. I played a lot of golf before I was a business owner, and I've always loved my golf. Since I've been a business owner, I've played probably 24 rounds over 5 years, which for any of the golfers out there will understand that's very, very little golf. And the flow on of this, so I'm comfortable with it. This was a conscious decision I made at the beginning. I knew there were things that I'd have to sacrifice, and whilst it's in my eyes a fantastic sport, it's too time consuming, and it's just been something that I've had to say no to. So I've decided this golf, amongst other things for me personally, was an example of something where I said, no, that's a no if I am to embark on this. If you're looking to add more hours to your life if you're looking to take away more hours from your life through a change like this, then be intentional with it. Understand exactly what are the things that you're going to sacrifice, because it's not necessarily the right play, and rarely the right play, to just say, I'll find a way and I'll compress everything and I'll make it happen. How will it impact your quality of life? If you're saying no to some of the things that you love, are you still going to be able to spring out of bed with the same level of energy and enthusiasm every day? How will it impact your family is a huge one. It's very, very common for me to sit down with a couple, perhaps couple with children, where when we start to talk about work a little bit more, at face value it might look like everything's fine, but after not too long it transpires that at least one member of the couple wishes that they were more present with their kids, they were more present with their partner, and they can really see the cost of that and the impact of not being present during those times. So again, what impact is it going to have for the people around you that you care about? How long are you willing to sacrifice? This is obviously a hugely important question when you're getting started, which is a lot of people might embark on this journey and say, okay, yeah, it's certainly going to be tough. I know it's going to be tough, but I'm ready to go. I'm ready to do this. Let's get started. Okay, that's great. But how long is it going to be tough for? Is it going to be tough for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? At what point will it really start to frustrate you that perhaps you're not getting the outcomes that you were looking to achieve in the first place? And then lastly, what may your personal life look like after a successful transition? If end in mind is to improve your financial life, and ultimately it should be, how is it going to improve your financial life? What are the things that perhaps you can start saying yes to again? Are the things you can say yes to for the first time now because you've got better capacity with time? You can have higher quality time with family, or do whatever it is that is actually valuable for you. These questions here, for me personally, I found it to be really valuable to try to seek out peers to ask them about what their personal life looks like, and particularly if those peers have the sort of role that you want. It's very, very easy to have misconceptions about a career or about a role change before you undertake it. And I think if there's plenty of people that are willing to share their experiences, even if you're to either if you have those connections yourself, or alternatively if you're to reach out on LinkedIn and proactively ask some people for a coffee. There's a lot of extroverts out there that will be willing to make that time for you. And I think these can be really valuable questions to get a sense for what will walking the journey look like for me from someone who has walked the journey themselves. Moving across to alignment with your values and interests, and this is much more around a deep dive of the actual role that you do. Are you going to find the new role purposeful? I like to think of this very much around the tasks that you're going to do. So not just the role, the body of work as a whole. You might come to work and have a higher level of excitement or energy about the overall work that you do, but what about the tasks? What about on a more granular level? The things that you're going to love are the things that you're going to really, really dislike, as I mentioned here. You really want to capture those as best you can and get a sense again for how well these things are going to serve you, or potentially how much these things are going to drain on you. My personal experience, again, speaking from my own journey as a business owner, has been that there are things, like you really, really do need to be at your best when you take this big leap. And if you are not at your best, potentially because things are grating on you and there are tasks that you're really not liking, you'll find it really, really hard to get good outcomes as part of this transition. Career development opportunities. What are the opportunities that exist if you pursue a change? And again, how will they align with your values and interests? Is it a case that when you make this transition, there might be a period of time where you're doing work that perhaps you view as below you because you've got to retrain yourself, you've got to reskill yourself before you can climb a new ladder? Alternatively, as I said, this might come down to reducing less hours, at which point you've got to consider that this is going to hamper your career development. It's much harder statistically. It's much harder to get meaningful promotions when you're not working full time. So to that end, you definitely do consider that, because you might be looking at one option and saying, oh, if I reduce my hours, this is the true cost, and you're mapping that out. But are you mapping out the career progression that you'd have if you'd continue to work full time? Because they're big. Often there are big numbers or big differences between the two. And lastly, again, over the long term, what elements of the role are going to keep you excited? What are the things that are really going to inspire you to get out of bed every day and give your best to this? This is a huge one for me personally. I think often a lot of career changes are driven based on financial outcomes. Don't underestimate how important it is to find something that is aligned with your values and interests. It staggers me how many people don't actually have a role that doesn't in any way align with their values and interests, and they're trying to find little bits of it every day where, like that tiny task aligns and that tiny task aligns, but on the whole it's just a job. Life's too short, in my personal opinion, to work just a job. You definitely deserve to be able to come to work and do something that you find meaningful. So that would absolutely be something to pursue, and if nothing else, it will heighten the likelihood that you can stick with that career change. Lastly, how is this change going to enable your financial goals? This one, obviously, as a financial advisor, this is very much in my sweet spot. The big questions, for instance, like what buffer is needed to undertake this change? What amount of money are you going to need to be able to ensure that if there are any surprises, if things don't quite work out the way that we want to, how can we be sure that we're still going to be heading in the right direction? Are your financial expectations realistic? A huge fault that I observe with business projections and the like is that they're often inaccurate. They're often too optimistic. The expenses are very, very short, and there should be a lot more expenses in there. Are you drinking your own Kool-Aid? Very, very important to have someone to be able to bounce that off and say, look, can you revisit these figures? How soon do you have to hit the expectations that you want? If you are looking at a career change, maybe there is a drop in income, for instance, how soon are you anticipating that you're going to get back to where you are or go beyond where you are? And also, again, who's testing, as it says underneath, who's testing those financial assumptions? If those assumptions are wrong by 10% or 20% or 50%, how big an impact does that have? Is it enormous? Is it minor? Hugely important based on your situation. And of course, the last question here, what is financial life going to look like after a successful transition? Now, this is very much a question for you. We talked before about the idea where we're trying to meet all three stages here. We're talking about alignment, we're talking about purpose, we're talking about down here in terms of your financial life. Well, after this, are you going to be able to do more of the things that you love? Is there going to be meaningful work following on from that? And is the juice worth the squeeze? And that's a critical question to ask as part of this process. So using an example here, we've got a case study. This is Andrew and Louise. I've obviously changed their names, but 2 clients that we have, both working, 3 kids. When they arrived, Andrew was well and truly fed up with his role. He certainly felt like it was time for a change, and he'd made the decision that he was going to go out and essentially do a similar role by himself. So he felt like he had the contacts available, he was ready to go. So much of the household income was earned by Andrew, so of course it was going to be pretty important that we got all of the numbers right. Having said that, in terms of their own financial lives, they had a large mortgage, they had some savings. As we went through the process with Andrew and Louise, we pretty quickly identified that there were some problems that needed addressing. One of the biggest ones was around undisciplined spending habits, creating big cash flow problems. It was a combination of just constantly overspending in areas, but also rewarding themselves, feeling like they're making good progress, they're patting themselves on the back for the household income they have, and then they're going out and having what I would perceive to be fairly significant expenses that are just lifestyle costs. The income assumptions that Andrew put forward in his business plan were highly optimistic in my eyes. What's more, there was no stress testing. And by stress testing, I mean, if you have a set of assumptions as to everything's going to track along, is going to go along these tracks, what happens if you're 5% or 10% or 20% off, as I discussed earlier? Some businesses, the difference between 15% growth on a business and 25% growth is enormous over a 5-year period, let alone a 10-year period. And rest assured, it can be the difference between being 3 years in the future and saying, I'm loving this work and it's achieving everything that I wanted and this is successful, or alternatively saying, I'm going to leave and I'm going to find something different and this whole project has been a failure. Andrew, without any quality insurances, particularly as he was looking to become self-employed, a huge risk to the family. And we wanted to make sure that that was resolved, given that once you were self-employed, there's no sick leave, there's no annual leave, lots of action needed to be taken. No plans to fund any of the imminent costs. Not obviously, there's the predicted costs like the mortgage and the like, but we hadn't taken into account that over the next 5 years, 2 of their 3 children were going to go into high school, and the intention was similar to the first child to go in private schooling, and that hadn't been considered in any way, or certainly not with enough detail. Other than perhaps just blind optimism to say financially we should be good enough to handle that when we get there. No family forecast, cash flow forecasts have been completed. The business forecasts had, but not the family ones. So again, and the family is where it's all going to feed down to. So you need to know and in mind that you can serve your household. And also, they just didn't have the right team around them. Andrew's accountant was very, very reactive and was just happy, sort of in wind down mode in terms of his career. Andrew didn't really have any professionals around him to make sure that things were structured correctly, and even personally, things like having a mortgage broker, these sorts of things had not been done, and they just weren't getting the best outcomes in a lot of different areas. So what did we do for them? Let's see if we can get some success here. Beautiful. Okay, so we introduced them to a high quality accountant to initially review, but then adjust the business forecasts. We looked at this in some detail, and then we also had a look at what their family cash flow looked like, and we confirmed pretty quickly that even though you're feeling frustrated and you desperately want change, now is not the right time for you to take that change. There's more that needs to be done in order for us to feel confident that you can make that this can be workable and you can successfully transition across. To their credit, for both of them, they worked incredibly hard, seeking to bring their costs down, to cut out all of the often irrational spending habits that they had. And it didn't take too long at all to start seeing some really, really practical gains based on some structure we created for them. Heightened accountability, more awareness about their expenses, as well as automating quite a few of their expenses too, where they really felt this sense of progress. They're saving a lot more money, and they're feeling as though they're laying a better foundation in order to be able to transition across to being self-employed. Andrew also, he quit his role as he approached self-employment, and he started a part-time role in replacement. And that essentially allowed him it afforded him more time to focus on the business and do a good task of growing the business, but still provided some additional cash flow, which essentially meant that they had a longer runway. There was a longer period of time for them to get this business up in the air, so to speak, and ensure that it could be as successful as they needed it to be. We introduced them to a mortgage broker that saved about $4,000 a year. So that was just another quick win that we were able to achieve. We finalised all the insurances before Andrew got self-employed. And that was really important too, because at the time when we did that, although he believed he may do that, there were no definitive plans for him to take that action. So we were able to ensure that he had things like income protection, which he just wouldn't have been able to get once he was self-employed, because his income would immediately have gone to zero. So, that again is a critical consideration if you are looking to do this. Don't underestimate how important it is to have that plan B. The plan A is that everything will just take off and happy days, we're going to be fine. But unfortunately, too often we observe the plan B of perhaps failing health or one of those insurable events where, in retrospect, we wish we had done this a little bit better. The long and the short is that Andrew has now commenced his business. It was commenced about 9 months after we started working together. It was commenced on a much better foundation of improved financial habits, better consistency around their finances, as well as being much clearer on what success will look like and having the team to be able to track that. And I'm very pleased to say, they're currently on track, which is exactly where we want them to be, of course. I'd like to talk lastly about the idea of avoiding some of the costly mistakes that can exist if you're starting a new business. Now, I'd love nothing more than if this graph were true, this concept of the likelihood of a change increasing based on you doing more and more preparation. But I know from experience that it is not. This graph actually looks a lot more like this. It's not preparation that increases the likelihood of change. It's just how much emotional desire you have for change. So I often like to encourage, if the clients who are considering any change in their lives, just to be clear, this isn't just about career, this is just generally speaking, question, what's actually driving your emotional desire for change? Is it frustration? Is it necessity? Is it despondency? Is it excitement? Let's explore that a little bit more, because just because you really want something emotionally doesn't mean that you should do it. It doesn't mean you should necessarily take that. Also, the flow-on of this is, sadly, there is often very, very little correlation between the level of preparation you do and how likely you are to actually execute a huge change in your life. And I think that's a really, really dangerous play if you're really serious about ensuring that the change has the highest likelihood of succeeding. If we think about something that I observe from a lot of people, and I think it's human nature, this concept that if you're starting something new, most people see it as a straight line. They say, okay, I'm going to do this, and I've got to do A and then B and then C, and then bam, I'm there, and happy days. And they don't realise, and again, in retrospect, of course, you'll identify this in all areas of your life, that the reality is never that. The reality, there's so many varying things that you have to do. I've certainly observed this in business when even I thought to myself that business would ultimately be easier than it is. It's not so much about the effort that you have to put in. It's just about the varying challenges that you face every day and the varying opportunities that come by every day. And putting all that together means that you're always facing it's always different scenery all of the time, and you've got to be equipped to deal with that. And that's where, as we go through this process with clients, we really do our best to say, well, let's start to explore what that scenery is going to look like. When are the costs going to come through? What sort of problems are you going to have? What sort of opportunities are you going to have? And how can we create the conditions that, again, there's the highest likelihood possible you're going to get the outcome from this project? Ultimately, what this means is if you're failing to plan for this big change, you're planning to fail. There are some big questions here that I'd love for you to look at and consider. The first one being, what's the financial impact of a reduced wage for you and or the family right now? Now, this is twofold, I suppose. There's the right now element of, well, I'd lose my wage or I'd reduce my wage from X to Y. But then what does this do? What does this actually mean for your household? What does it mean for your ability to purchase things that you need, purchase things that you want? whether that's going on holidays or any of the indulgences that you value. How big a toll is this actually going to have going forward? What are the big costs you'll have to meet in the future? If you're doing projections for the business, then you should be thinking about the cost that you'll have at year 1 and year 3 and year 5, and putting on staff and so on. What about the costs, like the fact that in the future, definitely we know that we're going to have private high school costs, or we know that my daughter's going to turn 21 and there'll be a $5,000 expense in order to have a big 21st party for her, like we did with other children, or whatever these things are. We bought a car for our 2 other children, and our 3rd child is about to turn 18, so it's very likely we're going to have those things too. I'd really love for you to lean in and try to put down as many of those things as possible to feel super confident that you can fund those. And what you might often find is if you go through that process, you'll find that a lot of the money that you have that's been allocated to this transition has actually already been allocated to other things that are just going to happen in the future. So you really can't rely necessarily on all of these funds. What measures do you have to track financial progress? What sort of accountability do you have? To whom? And what sort of cadence is there to make sure that you stay on track and you remain accountable to whatever targets are being set? This one is in terms of stop losses, this is a huge question. If you're not familiar with what a stop loss is, a stop loss it's an investment term for when, if you buy an investment that's falling in value, at a certain point in time, you say, stop, I'm done, no more, I'll just take the loss and I'm finished. And there are stop losses in everything in life. Sometimes you just have to call it. There's stop losses in relationships where you've been in a poor relationship for a long time and you feel compelled to stick with it, but eventually you just say, no, I've got to call it. You hit your stop loss and you say no more. What's your stop loss in business? Or what's your stop loss if it with a new career or a significant change in your life? What point would you say, all right, I'm done? And I can't stress enough that this isn't just about your financial stop loss. This is about also your emotional stop loss, about your time stop loss. At what point in my life would I say this is ridiculous, I'm devoting too much time to this, something must change? At what point would I say I'm drained, I'm exhausted, I really can't give any more to this, it's starting to affect my mental health or my physical health, I've got to take action. I like to encourage that people set those boundaries before they start the journey, because I find that if you don't, the boundaries just billow out. And lastly, what support do you need before or after taking action? If you have taken action already, congratulations. Do you have the right team around you in order to heighten the likelihood you're still going to get the outcomes that you need? And if you do not have the right team around you, how do you find them? And how can you ensure, again, that this work that you're doing in this change that you're either considering or you have undertaken is going to prove to be one of the great decisions that you make. In terms of the next steps, from our end, if you would like to book in a strategy session, I'd love an opportunity to learn more about your situation and how we might be able to help. The first session that we have is what's called an alignment session. It's a pretty light-hearted session. It runs for about 45 minutes, and the purpose of that is very simply to see if we're a fit for one another. I'd love to learn more about you and your plans and your priorities and exactly where you are at the moment, perhaps what sort of advice you might be looking for, and then equally I can take the time to explain more about who we are, what we do, who we serve, the likely fees that we might have in order to work together, and I suppose set the best expectations as to what working together might look like. If there's alignment at the end of that conversation, then brilliant, we could look to book in a time and meet face to face. Alternatively, if for whatever reason we're not a fit for one another, that's fine. No hard feelings. That's the purpose of the session, to work out if we are. So that will certainly allow you to be clearer on exactly who you need to partner with, and I'll do my level best to make any introductions that may be valuable for you. That's everything from my own end, guys. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm really hopeful that there's been some value for you in this session. If you have any questions, even just little one-off things, you're more than welcome. I'm more than happy for you to reach out to me. You're welcome to do that. So feel free to get in touch. There's a link that you can click immediately below this video to book in your alignment session. So I would love an opportunity to chat with you in the future. Thank you, everyone.